special. So we've been walking through these things that really sometimes hurts us in life, and today we are going to talk about a subject that it might be uncomfortable for you. It's a subject that a lot of times we don't really ever talk about, and that is the subject of abuse. We're going to look at a chapter in the Bible that might be one of the most disheartening chapters in the entire Bible. But it's one of those chapters that when I read it, I'm saddened by what happens there. But also, I read this chapter and I realize that, it gives me hope that the Bible is not written just simply by man, because most people would have just neglected to even tell us this story and just the truth that's in it. And so as we talk about this subject, it's might be a little uncomfortable for you. It's definitely going to be a little uncomfortable for me, and you might actually learn a little bit more about me this morning. But I went to the Center for Disease Control's website, and I found some statistics on abuse that I just simply found startling. I just want to share some of these with you. They say that every 9 seconds in America that someone is being abused. So every 9 seconds. So the time that we sit here and talk about abuse over the next 30 minutes, about 200 people in the United States are going to be abused during that time. They say that 1 in 4 women experience violence from a boyfriend or a husband. 15 million children in America will witness abuse in their home this year. 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men have been sexually abused. 6 out of 10 sexual abuse cases happen in the home of the victim or a relative or a friend. There's 1 child abuse reported in America every 10 seconds. 1 in 3 girls and 1 in 7 boys will be sexually assaulted before their 18th birthday. 30% of abused children will go on to abuse children in their life. 20% of the U.S. population has experienced some type of abuse in their life. And the CDC estimates that America spends $146 billion a year on abuse cases. Is there any hope? Like, when you read those statistics, it ought to sadden your heart about what's happening, but this is a problem that is not going away in our nation and in our world. It's actually, these numbers that we have are probably underreported. There are a lot of people who don't even report what happens to them. And to think about that 20% of all the people that you're going to meet this week, at one point in their life, probably were sexually abused. Like, you can go to work and count 1, 2, 3, 4, you. 1, 2, 3, 4, you. You go to the mall and 1 out of every 5 people that you see at the mall probably were sexually abused. 1 out of 5 people that you go to school with were probably sexually abused. Is there any hope? What can we do about this? This is an epidemic that is serious in our nation. And if you're here and you have experienced this trauma in your life, I want you to know today that you are not alone. I stand before you in full transparency and tell you that I'm one of the 20%. You are not alone. We, as the Church of Jesus Christ, we must, as we think about this issue, we must embrace our identity to be the hands and the feet of Jesus. We must embrace our destiny to declare to men and women and boys and girls that there is hope and healing in Jesus Christ. We must be great examples of the transforming power of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We have to be people that can demonstrate that there is healing power, that the power of the Holy Spirit that works in us can produce great change and healing in our lives. So if you're here this morning, or you're watching online, or you know somebody in your life that has been abused, I want you to know that you are welcome here. whatever your baggage, whatever your issues, however your brokenness demonstrates itself in your life, that you are welcome here. Because what we know is that God can mend what has been marred. That's our headline this morning. I want you to understand this, that however you have been hurt in your life, that God can mend whatever has been marred. And we're going to look here in 2 Samuel chapter 13, just to kind of give you a little bit of a background. What's happened to this point is, of course, David has become the king of the nation. We saw a few weeks ago in 2 Samuel chapter 9 and how he brought Mephibosheth into his family. And then what happens after that? At the height of his power and the height of the kingdom, King David commits adultery with Bathsheba. People find out about it. He has her husband Uriah put to death. And David has been living for about a year with the guilt of his sin. And then finally, in chapter 12, God tells us there that Nathan the prophet, he comes and he confronts David in the midst of his sin. And he promises David, he says, David, listen, your sin is forgiven. God has forgiven your sin, but, Nathan says, calamity is going to come upon your house. Which is a very good, important spiritual principle, is that, yes, we are forgiven. God forgives all of our sins 100%, but sometimes we just have the consequences, the natural consequences of sin in our life. And we see here in 2 Samuel chapter 13, really some of the consequences of that, and really some of the calamity that fell upon David's house. And so I want you to see here as we start, we're going to just read through chapter 13, but really I just want to start with the components of abuse. How does this happen? And abuse happens, first of all, when there is an abuser. Listen to what happens here in verse 1. In the course of time, Amnon, son of David, fell in love with Tamar, the beautiful sister of Absalom, son of David. Now Amnon is the firstborn of David. He is the one who ultimately should have ascended to the throne of his father. He was next in line. He was his firstborn. He was the strongest of all of his brothers. He was the oldest of all of his brothers. And that's usually what happens in abuse. You have this person who has some type of authority, is stronger, is bigger, has some type of authority. So you have the abuser, but then you have, on the other side of that, you have the victim. Because in verse 2, he tells us this: Amnon became frustrated to the point of illness on account of his sister Tamar, for she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible for him to do anything to her. So you have this abuser who has power and authority and strength, and then you have a victim who is weaker, who is vulnerable, who can be preyed upon. And that's where Tamar finds herself in this story, in this account. Is there's Amnon, who is stronger, and then there's Tamar, who they tell us right here that she was a beautiful girl, she was a virgin, and it seemed impossible. Amnon realized there was nothing he could do to her. And then abuse happens when there is a disregard for the victim. In verse 3, now Amnon had a friend named Jonadab, son of Shimeah, David's brother. Jonadab was a very shrewd man. He asked Amnon, why do you, the king's son, look so haggard morning after morning? Won't you tell me? Amnon said to him, I am in love with Tamar, my brother Absalom's sister. Go to bed and pretend to be ill, Jonadab said. When your father comes to see you, say to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and give me something to eat. Let her prepare the food in my sight that I may watch her, and then eat it from her hand. So Amnon lay down and pretended to be ill. When the king came to see him, Amnon said to him, I would like my sister Tamar to come and make some special bread in my sight so I may eat from her hand. So here he is. He's the abuser. Tamar is the victim, and he has a total disregard for her, right? It says here that he says that I am in love with Tamar. That's not love. Love always has in mind the other person, always wants to take care of the other person's needs and wants and desires. Abuse happens when the abuser has no regard whatsoever for the other person. So he says he's in love with her, but he's not in love with her. He just is seeking a way to abuse her. And that word abuse actually comes from it's a compound word where we get abnormal use. They abuse. You use something abnormally. And that's exactly what happens here. There's Amnon, who's stronger, he's bigger, he has more respectability. There's Tamar, who's the victim, who is vulnerable, and she's being preyed upon. And then there is a total disregard that happens here. And as we see here, as we go on and read through this chapter, you're going to find that Amnon actually attacks and rapes his sister. And what happens here is when this hurt happens in our life, we begin to believe a lie. And the lie that abuse will tell you is that you are ruined for life. That somehow now you are no longer precious, you are no longer valuable to anyone. And so this lie will tell you over and over and over again, the lie of abuse will tell you that you are just ruined for life. You're spoiled goods. You're one who now needs to be set aside. Because what happens in abuse is that you now feel like you are down on the rung lower than everybody else. Because you've been taken advantage of. So we're going to look here this morning as we walk through the events that happened on this day and really look at really how this begins to live itself out in our life. If you have ever been abused, if you know somebody who's been abused, and they are believing this lie that they are ruined for life, some of the ways in which it manifests itself in their life. And the first part of this profile is just the idea of betrayal. The person who has been abused feels betrayed. Listen to what happens in verse 7. David sent word to Tamar. So Amnon gets his father in on this. And this is a truth that you can't miss, is that abuse can happen anywhere. This was in the king's own house. And King David had no idea what was going on. And he almost became an unknowing accomplice to what was happening here. So he comes to his father David. He says, hey, have Tamar bring me this. And so David sent word to Tamar at the palace, go to the house of your brother Amnon and prepare some food for him. So Tamar went to the house of her brother Amnon, who was lying down. She took some dough, kneaded it, made the bread in his sight, and baked it. Then she took the pan and served the bread to him, but he refused to eat. Send everyone out of here, Amnon said. So everyone left. Then Amnon said to Tamar, bring the food here into my bedroom, so I may eat from your hand. And Tamar took the bread she had prepared and brought it to her brother Amnon in his bedroom. But when she took it to him to eat, he grabbed her and said, come to bed with me, my sister. What happens here in abuse is there is a great betrayal that happens. Because here is one that was supposed to be trusted. This is one that was supposed to be able to protect, but he becomes the one who is preying upon the victim. Right as we read through this, we know that David must have trusted Amnon because he goes and sends Tamar to his house. Amnon's guards, his servants must have trusted him because they all left when he sent them out of the room. Even Tamar herself felt that she could trust her older brother Amnon because she willingly takes it into the bedroom. Because she didn't think anything was going to happen. The moment she gets there is the moment that she is betrayed. And what happens when we believe the lie of abuse that we are ruined for life means now that I can't trust anyone. That's why you may encounter people who have experienced abuse in their life, and it is very, very, very difficult for them to trust anyone. Because the last time they trusted somebody who was supposed to be trustworthy, they betrayed their innocence. They betrayed their trust. And now this person believes this lie that I'm so ruined for life that just everybody is seeking to take advantage of me. And for that reason, I cannot trust another person. Because they've been betrayed to their core. We're going to look at betrayal even a little bit more in depth next week. But you understand what that means to be betrayed. Maybe you've not been betrayed in abuse, but maybe you've been betrayed in other ways. Maybe you told somebody something you didn't expect them to tell anybody else, and they went and told everybody else, and you were betrayed. But in the area of abuse, it is a deep betrayal that is deep, deep into the heart and the soul of the victim. However, God can mend what has been marred. And so there's this idea of betrayal, but also there is the feeling of violation. In verse 12, we pick it up here. So he grabbed his sister and said to her, "Come to bed with me." In verse 12, she says, "Don't, my brother." She said to him, "Don't force me. Such a thing should not be done in Israel. Don't do this wicked thing. What about me? Where could I get rid of my disgrace? And what about you? You would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel. Please speak to the king. He will not keep me from being married to you." But he refused to listen to her, and since he was stronger than she, he raped her. I think those are the three saddest words in the entire Bible. Here was one that was trusted. He violated her. A violation is simply going beyond the posted law. Like when you violate the speed limit, you see posted the speed limit is a certain level, and you say, well, that doesn't apply to me, and I'm just going to violate that. Or you come to a stop sign, and the posted sign says to stop, but you just run through the stop sign because you violate. You just run through whatever the law is. You run through all the boundaries. You just go over those, and that's what happens here. Listen again to the words that she says. She says, such a thing should not be done in Israel. She says, what you're about to do, you're going to violate me, but you're going to violate just what should be considered normal in the land. She calls it a wicked thing. She said, you would be like one of the wicked fools in Israel, but he refused to listen. Violated her. When we believe the lie of abuse that we are ruined for life, you know what that means? It just means that the next person, just like with betrayal and violation, that the next person is just going to just disregard the standards, disregard the laws, disregard the fences and the boundaries, and just plow right over them once again and violate me again. However, God can mend what has been marred. So betrayal, violation. The third thing she experiences is disgrace. Listen to in verse 15. So he rapes her. Then Amnon hated her with intense hatred. In fact, he hated her more than he loved her. It's a very important principle about sin, is that the sin, or the lie that sin tries to tell you is that it will satisfy you. And then when you commit whatever sin it is, and you think it's going to satisfy you, it leaves you empty. And that's what Amnon experiences here. He says he hated her now. And in fact, he hated her more than he had loved her. But I would say that love is probably the wrong word to use there anyways. That he probably hated her to begin with. And then after this, he hated her more than he loved her. Amnon said to her, "Get up and get out." "No," she said to him, "sending me away would be a greater wrong than what you have already done to me." But he refused to listen to her. He called his personal servant and said, "Get this woman out of here and bolt the door after her." So his servant put her out and bolted the door after her. She even asked him before it even happened, she says, "Where can I go to get rid of, if you do this, where can I go to get rid of my disgrace?" And when I read those verses, all I can think about is how Tamar's heart must have just sank. The moment she was ushered out of the house, the door is shut, and then she hears the latch lock behind her. That she is now disgraced. Any word that has that word dis at the beginning, it means to separate. It means to remove. And to be disgraced means that now you feel that there is no grace for you. That you have been removed from grace, or grace has been removed from you. And now you cannot experience any grace in your life. That you have been disgraced. And the lie of abuse will tell us over and over and over again that you're ruined for life, and because of that, that there is no grace for you. However, God can mend what has been marred. And then the final thing that she experiences here is shame. So a servant put her out and bolted the door after her. She was wearing a richly ornamented robe, which for this was the kind of garment the virgin daughters of the king wore. So she had this beautiful robe on. It's what all the beautiful virgin daughters of the king wore. And then listen to what happens. Tamar put ashes on her head and tore the ornamented robe she was wearing. She put her hand on her head and went away, weeping aloud as she went. She was shamed. She said, "No longer am I worthy to be able to wear this garment that the daughters of the king wear," and she rips it in two. She takes the ashes and she puts them on her head. She puts her head in her hands and she starts weeping loudly as she ran away. And I'm sure that this was not the only day in her life that she wept loudly over this. Because now she believes that she is ruined for life. That now she is a shameful person, that there's no one who can understand. She's believed a lie that there's no one who can understand. She's believed a lie that she is ruined for life. She's believed a lie that there's no hope and there's no grace and there's nowhere where she can find healing for what has happened to her. She is shamed. Because what happens oftentimes by those who have been abused, the victims of abuse, especially in physical and sexual abuse, they believe that somehow they're responsible for what happened to them. That, I shouldn't have let that happen, or I should have stopped it, or I should have said something. And all those questions come back in our minds when this happens to us, and we're like, why didn't I stop it? And we feel partially responsible for what has happened to us. Because that's what the lie of abuse will tell you. That you're ruined for life, and to some degree, it's your fault. However, here's the truth. The truth is this, is that it is not your fault. If you have been abused in your life, if you know somebody who's been abused, they are the victim. You were the victim. It's not your fault. I'm going to tell you a story that only 4 people in my entire life know, but I consider you all friends, so I'm going to bring you in. When I was a teenager, there was an older man in my life that I trusted. And over the course of several months of my life as a teenager, I was sexually assaulted by this older man in my life. And for a long time, I believed the lie that it was somehow my fault. Why? I mean, I was a teenager. This was an old man. Why didn't I make him stop? Why didn't I tell somebody? Why didn't I run away? And my mind was filled with all of these things. Why didn't I stop this? And I carried that guilt with me for 20 years of my life. I never told anyone. There were a lot of times in my life where I would sit by myself and just cry. Because the shame and the pain that I was carrying, I thought nobody would understand. If I were to tell even my own wife, that I would not be good enough for her. It wasn't until a series of events happened in my life that I began to learn some things that I want to share with you that I learned on my journey. So that if you find yourself in the same situation that I found myself in, that I want you to know that there is hope. Just a few things that I learned. Number one is this, is that when we deny abuse, it brings destruction. But when we disclose abuse, it brings about deliverance. Right? A lot of times people who have been abused, they deny it in one of two ways. Either it's repressed, a repressed memory is just those memories that our mind just unconsciously just buries so that we don't remember the trauma, what happened to us. Or in my case, it was just that I would suppress it. Like, I would just carry on as if nothing had happened. I just lived my life as if I was okay when inside everything was falling apart. And listen to what happens here in Tamar's life, because she didn't find deliverance. She found destruction. In verse 20, so she goes away. Her brother Absalom said to her, "Has that Amnon, your brother, been with you?" And then listen to his advice. "Be quiet now, my sister. He is your brother. Don't take this thing to heart." Like, I give him credit for, like, trying. But as one who's come through on the other side, that is like the worst advice you could ever give. If you're here and you have experienced any type of abuse in your life, you need to talk to someone. You need to talk to a friend. You need to talk to a parent. You need to talk to a pastor. You need to talk to somebody that you trust. You need to talk about it, because what I found out in my life, that what I buried alive ultimately is going to rise. Like, I tried to push it down, I tried to keep it down, and what happens when we try to just deny it and bury it and keep it under wraps is that it's going to find its way out in other ways. And me, just like others that I know, would then begin to live out the lies in our life in some very harmful ways, some very self-destructive ways, in ways that were not godly. Because as you hold that in, you believe the lies longer and longer, and the more you listen to the lies, the more they sound like truth. You feel like you're unworthy, and you're not valuable, and you're no longer precious, because what's happened here is something has been stolen from you. As the victim of abuse, something was stolen from you. Your innocence, your yesterday, your today, your tomorrow, it was stolen from you. And so when you deny it, it's only going to destroy you from the inside out. But when you get it out, and when I finally told my wife and a counselor who was sitting there what had happened to me 20 years earlier, it just felt like physically, it felt that a weight had been lifted off of me finally. And then healing could start to happen. And this is what I learned through all of this, is God very seldom heals what we keep hidden. Like if we keep it hidden, very rarely do we find healing from it. It's only when we let it out that we truly find the healing of God, and God can then begin to mend what has been marred. So disclosing the abuse. And the second thing I learned is that abuse does not have to be our identity or our destiny. It doesn't have to be your identity or destiny. Listen again to the sad thing that happens to Tamar. So her brother says, "Don't take this thing to heart." And then listen, and Tamar lived in her brother Absalom's house, a desolate woman. It became her destiny. She believed the lie of abuse, that she was ruined for life. And I don't know, we don't hear much about Tamar after this, but I can only assume that she lived the rest of her days, the rest of her life, as a woman who was desolate, who felt that she was unworthy, she was no longer valuable, she was no longer precious, and now lived the rest of her life as a desolate woman. And it became her destiny and her identity, because this is what happens. When we are abused, what happens is we make that our identity. Listen here. She lived in her brother's house for the rest of her life as a desolate woman. She had forgot the fact that she was a daughter of the king. And when we begin to believe the lie of abuse, we forget because we think we're no longer valuable, we think we're no longer precious, that we're damaged goods, and we forget that we are a child of the King. It doesn't have to be your destiny or your identity. And then number 3, forgive the one who committed the abuse. It wasn't your fault. But the more you hold on to it, it's going to destroy you. Verse 21, when King David heard all this, he was furious. Absalom never said a word to Amnon, either good or bad. He hated Amnon because he had disgraced his sister Tamar. And they held on to this anger and unforgiveness. And if, verse 23, 2 years later, what happens is Amnon goes out and he kills his brother Absalom. And then in verse 23, Jonadab, there he is again, that guy. But Jonadab, son of Shimeah, David's brother, said, "My lord should not think that they killed all the princes, only Amnon is dead. This has been Absalom's expressed intention ever since the day Amnon raped his sister Tamar." Unforgiveness will destroy you. And I am speaking from personal experience. It is not easy. Because that person betrayed you, that person violated you, that person disgraced you, that person shamed you, and deep down inside, what we want more than anything else is for that person to get what they deserve. But when we hold on to unforgiveness, it's like pulling the pin on a hand grenade, holding it in our hand, and expecting the other person to blow up. Because unforgiveness ultimately is going to harm and damage us. And I know it's not easy. And I will tell you this, in your own strength, it is impossible. But with the strength of Jesus Christ working through you, through the ministry and the power of the Holy Spirit, it is possible. Ephesians 4:32 tells us, "Be tenderhearted and kind to one another, forgiving one another, just as God in Christ Jesus has forgiven you." As many times as I've betrayed and violated and disgraced and shamed my Savior, He has always forgiven me. And He says in the same way that we're to forgive one another. And again, I know none of this is easy, but I do know, coming on the other side of it, that when we're willing to address these things head on, step out in faith, that God can mend what has been marred. I just want to share with you, we've been closing here with testimonies from people, and you heard a little bit about my testimony. But I want to let you hear from Sherry King. Her husband is the pastor of a large church in South Carolina. Share with you her story about what happened in her life.